After the devastation of the black summer of bushfires, there had to be a reckoning, and it began today. It's called the Royal Commission into National Natural Disaster Arrangements, but it's known as the Bushfire Inquiry, and its role is to figure out ways to better prepare for and respond to natural disasters, to learn the lessons of last summer.
The fire burning out of control has come within metres of homes and a school northwest of Sydney.
A day that began with the Premier declaring a state of emergency has descended into chaos.
We are in the midst of a bushfire crisis tonight, the likes of which this state has never seen.
The death toll from the South Coast firestorm has grown.
Homes are again under threat north of Sydney as bushfires flare up.
More than 1,000 homes destroyed and 4 million hectares burned out.
Tonight, fires so serious they're generating their own weather system.
The state is in the grip of a bushfire emergency.
Australia's New Year fires are continuing to rage along the east coast this morning.
The blazes bore down on small communities and tourist towns along the coast.
The ring of fire around Sydney is as angry and as frightening as we've seen.
What a summer. Well, when the Royal Commission was called, the Prime Minister said it would acknowledge climate change and focus on practical action to prevent, mitigate and respond to bushfires and other natural disasters. So, on the first day of hearings, the Commissioners chose to begin with scientists. The Bureau of Meteorology said the forecasts ahead of last bushfire season proved to be very accurate, and while next season doesn't look to be as bad, there was strong evidence of longer bushfire seasons.
We are extending the fire season at both ends, and for Eastern Victoria and South Coast New South Wales, I think it's around 21 days or a month into autumn. The trends probably load the dice towards worse fire seasons in general.
Sue Townsend lost her house in the Snowy Mountains and says she hadn't considered the fires a threat in that area.
Tumbarumba is so wet and green, so we knew there were fires around, but the townspeople had spoken about fires in the past, but for us it just didn't seem like a threat at that point of time.
Greg Mullins is the former New South Wales Fire and Rescue Commissioner and is a member of the Climate Council. He was part of the group of former fire chiefs who warned of catastrophic fire risk ahead of the summer's fires. The group has also made a detailed submission to the Royal Commission. Greg joins us now. Good evening to you.
Hi, Ellen.
Greg, I read through the 33 recommendations you and the other former fire chiefs made to the Royal Commission, and frankly, they look like the Royal Commission report. They could be it. 1, 2 and 3 call on the Royal Commission to put beyond doubt that these fires were unprecedented, beyond normal variations in the past, clearly driven by climate change. Now, why is that central to all of the other recommendations that follow?
Look, I think the best analogy is that we're at war. We were at war last summer, Black Summer. If you're going to be at war, you need to know who the enemy is, what their capability is and what they're going to do in the future. And if we keep arguing about climate change, now in my case, I'm entering my 50th year of fighting fires. I've seen it change. My father fought fires from 1939. We talked about it, and I've watched it in my lifetime change for the worse. If we keep arguing about the science and don't listen to the experts, we'll keep falling over. And I look at this season. I was fighting fires as a volunteer. When I retired as Commissioner, I went back in the trucks, and just unprecedented fire behaviour, incredible spotting, fire-generated storms. These things never used to happen. From 1978 to 2001, there were 2 fire-generated storms in Australia. Since then, at least 78, and probably a 33% increase last year. So this is weather driven by climate change, driven by what we've done, burning oil, coal and gas.
And so is your basic position then that unless you accept the science of the climate change, you can't really come to terms with that changed fire threat, which you detail in this set of recommendations. You talk about long-distance spotting, you talk about intense and sustained ember attacks, and then you talk about that terrifying thing which you're referring to just there, pyroconvective fires, which is where a fire creates its own weather system, its own thunderstorm, and dry lightning comes out of it and starts fires other places. So are you saying that you can't actually deal with those scary new set of facts about fire unless you recognise that it's climate change?
Well, that's exactly what I'm saying, and what fire chiefs from every fire service in Australia, retired fire chiefs who are able to actually say this without getting into trouble. That's what we're saying, that we're being overwhelmed by Mother Nature. She's had enough of the poisons that we're pouring into the atmosphere. And it's not a political issue, or it shouldn't be. It should be a bipartisan issue to just say, look, we have a moral obligation to future generations to try and keep a lid on this. We heard in the Royal Commission today the CSIRO saying it won't get any better for a long time, even if we stop emissions today, but it will get worse.
Sandy, can I turn to you? You've sat on a couple of business roundtables with federal government ministers and with local mayors in affected areas. Greg and his colleagues have called for the Royal Commission to really detail the link between climate change and the harm to the economy. What do you think of that idea?
Totally. I really feel that there needs to be a lot of focus on sustainability, circular economy, and also climate change. And attending those roundtable meetings at Parliament House and listening to the effects on communities and small businesses and individuals and wildlife is absolutely heartbreaking. And, I couldn't actually speak after some of those meetings because they were so heartbreaking to hear the real stories, like see these people who had fought fires or lost their homes, or, just seen so many properties destroyed and so many forests destroyed. And I think that we have to do something. We have to, as a country as well, be very committed to sustainability, to recognising what a circular economy is and being committed to that, and also to climate change. I think it's a must now. We really have to listen to, I guess, we've been put on notice and we need to now act.
Wes, do you think there's an appetite to do so? I mean, COVID has sort of changed everything we tell ourselves. I mean, maybe it has, maybe it hasn't. It's changed how we think about debt and deficit, how we think about the role of science in directing public policy. Every Premier and Prime Minister has always got the Chief Medical Officer under their arm at every press conference. But why would this be the moment on the cusp of such desperate economic times to be really engaging with this issue that has eluded us?
But I think because we're on the cusp of these quite tragic economic times too, is the time to shift, to retool the economy as well as trying to build it in a way that would help benefit the kind of climate change conversation. To say, how do we look at how do we look now at the use of our cars? They're all sitting in our garages, not getting anywhere. What does it mean for the economy that we work more from home and that we still are productive in those ways that we can? What does it mean now to look at more digital technologies to meet? We don't need as much air travel, perhaps. To retool ourselves to be more friendly to the environment. I think this is the very time to do it. I think we have, as you're saying, a greater appreciation of experts because they're saving our lives. And because it's so immediate, we've jumped onto it. But I think the long term, we have to think like that as well. This younger generation that has, insecure work, that the idea that they'll be the ones who have to pay back a lot of this debt.
Right.
How do we look after them and not just burden them also with the climate change burden?
Jenny, can I just go to you really quickly? I mean, the last year the government was putting $4 million into a feasibility study to, asking the question, should the government, the federal government, because private business doesn't want to, build a new coal-fired power station at Collinsville in Queensland? OK, so they've discussed just last Thursday, the discussion paper comes out, what'll we do to meet our future energy needs? Do you see anything in Canberra of the government kind of creeping away from the coal wars a little bit?
Oh, I think it's definitely creeping away from the coal wars. The technology roadmap that it put out did not, for example, include any reference really to coal and certainly any new coal-fired power stations. So I think the reality is, though, that they're trying to put gas into that equation as part of the transition. In terms of the bushfires, the link with climate change, I don't think the government is trying to deny anymore at all. I think what they're, however, trying to say is there are all sorts of other practical measures that have to be put in place as well. So I don't think it's a war nearly as much as it used to be, and hopefully we'll get to some sensible position.
Doug?
Well, I just totally disagree with that analysis from Jennifer. This government has been abysmal at trying to deal with global warming. This is about their 19th attempt to try and pretend that they're doing something. This technology roadmap is not what the government has been asked to do. The government was supposed to go to Glasgow and take forward a plan to reduce CO2 emissions, not a technology roadmap. They were supposed to go there and say exactly what they were going to do. There are those in the coalition who will fight this all the way, will want to build more coal-fired power stations when the finances are not going to be there. Gas is not the long-term answer. And when you talk about the affordability of doing things, we can't afford not to deal with global warming, because young people into the future will be worse off than ever if we don't deal with global warming. This government is not equipped or wants to do anything about it.
What's this Royal Commission really going to achieve, do you think, Greg? I mean, it's going to report in August. I'm right in saying August is the reporting date. They've got pretty wide terms of reference. They can go wherever they like. But why would this be the change maker?
Well, look, I'm thinking positively that it will make a major change. I look back in history, the Royal Commission into the 1939 fires, the Stretton Royal Commission made major changes to bushfire fighting and prevention. The Teague Royal Commission into Black Saturday in 2009 totally changed the operational paradigm of fire and emergency services. We had emergency warnings. It's a life first, leave the day before.
But isn't
major
it much
changes.
Easier to achieve? Because when I rattle through your 33 recommendations and you get to things like, you and your colleagues get to things like, we've got to fundamentally rethink how we fight fires, right? It seems to the layperson, when you watch the Gospers Mountain mega fire just burn and burn and burn, there seems to be a view that if it's in a national park, you can let it burn, there's no threat to life. And you're saying, you and your colleagues are saying, no. Rapid detection and response. You need a clear objective that it's bigger than 10 hectares. You've got to get it out in 24 hours.
Look, and no criticism whatsoever of fire and emergency services, national parks, forestry. They actually did try to put out that fire, but it was just too intense. What we're saying is they didn't have the tools available to actually achieve that. And that's where the federal government comes in. They were holding back funding for aircraft, and then it was too late. So there's a whole range of new tools. We need to build homes differently. We need refuges in small, fragile communities that are subject.
Just to interrupt, there are two huge recommendations there. You're talking about new roofing standards, that your roof and how you build it is critical to how you survive. And also you're talking about these dual-purpose buildings in high-risk areas, which are big enough to support and protect the whole community if there's only one road in and out.
Well, exactly. And where people die in fires generally is on the road trying to flee a fire. And that's not a good thing to do. So they need to be able to shelter in place. They found this in Portugal some years ago. So they're building these big dual purpose, might be a sporting stadium, but that's the shelter. They even drive the local fire engine inside as the fire goes through. We need to have new thinking. Power lines above ground, they need to be below ground and fireproof so that we still have electricity afterwards. Major decisions. And what this is saying is lack of action on climate change is now costing us, and it's going to cost us far more now than action on climate change would have decades ago. But look, they're listening to experts and scientists finally with COVID. I hope that goes forward. I hope the Royal Commission settles the argument and says, here's a plan.
All right, we are out of time. I'm sorry, Doug. And I do note, Wes, and we must get you back when we find some of these submissions, that the Royal Commission is also calling on people to send in their personal experiences and share their photos and videos of what happened during the fire. It's called the Bushfire History Project. Just really briefly, what's the significance of sharing that kind of trauma and making that part of the fabric of the social history?
Well, I think about the Stolen Generations Royal Commission, where if you tell stories, you can heal yourself by telling a story. You can feel that you're acknowledged, but also you can affect the national storytelling. It actually sits in your heart in a different way. It's not just something that happened somewhere else. It's something that had real people. It affects you because it was real people who lived through all that stuff. And I think what was great about the ABC in these last fires, that you told the stories of people in such a beautiful way that we all gave. And all of this money was about looking after our citizens in that way.
Greg, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Ellen.
Greg Mullins is the former New South Wales Fire and Rescue Chief and Councillor with the Climate Council.